The mortgage application folder felt oddly heavy in my hands, like it carried more than just paper and promises. I stared at the name on the cover, Richard Peterson, my fingers tracing the embossed letters of Lakeside Financial where I'd worked for the past 3 years. 3 years since Richard, my husband of 40 years, had packed his bags and left for his 29-year-old yoga instructor. 3 years since he'd told me that he'd found himself in Amber's downward dog position. 3 years of rebuilding myself from the shattered pieces he'd left behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And now, by some cosmic joke that only the universe could appreciate, his mortgage application had landed on my desk. Eleanor, do you have the Peterson file ready for review? Margaret, our department head, poked her head into my office. The investment committee meets at 2. I smiled, sliding the folder into my desk drawer. I'm still reviewing some of the financials. I'll have everything prepared for the meeting. Margaret nodded, her eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. You know, if you're uncomfortable with this one, I can reassign it. Small town problems, right? We all end up crossing paths eventually. She knew. Of course she knew. In Oak Ridge, a town of barely 20,000 people, everyone knew everything about everyone. They had watched as Richard left me for a woman who hadn't even been born when we exchanged our vows. They had seen me stumble through grief in the produce section of Morgan's grocery, crying over cantaloupe because Richard had always picked the perfect one. They had witnessed my transformation from Eleanor Peterson, devoted wife and community volunteer, to Eleanor Winters, returning to my maiden name and my career in banking that I'd abandoned 40 years ago to support Richard's ambitions. I'm perfectly fine handling this file, Margaret, I replied, straightening the framed banking license on my desk. It's just business, after all. Margaret's eyebrow arched skeptically. If you say so, just remember, we need objective decisions. Personal feelings have no place in financial assessments. I finished her sentence with the company mantra. Don't worry. I've been doing this job for 3 years without incident. This application will be treated like any other. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After she left, I pulled the folder back out, opening it to the first page where Richard's familiar handwriting filled the margins with notes. Always making notes, as if the printed forms weren't clear enough for his superior intellect. I remembered how he used to annotate even our grocery lists, adding unnecessary specifications about the ripeness of avocados or the brand of coffee. The application was for a beachfront property in Sandpoint, the coastal community 30 miles south of Oak Ridge. $1.2 million for a 3-bedroom modern build with panoramic ocean views. The very property we had discussed purchasing for our retirement during our 38th anniversary dinner. When I retire next year, Richard had said, clinking his champagne, glass against mine, we'll finally buy that beach house. Just you, me, and endless horizons. 14 months later, he retired from his dental practice. 16 months later, he was gone. I flipped through the financial statements, instinct and training taking over as I began my professional assessment. Richard's retirement accounts were substantial. His dental practice had been very successful, but not as substantial as they should have been. I frowned, noticing several large withdrawals over the past 2 years. The bell over our office door chimed, and through my open office door, I caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette approaching the reception desk. My stomach tightened into a complex knot of emotions I'd spent 3 years trying to untangle. I'm here to speak with a loan officer about my mortgage application. Richard's voice carried through the office. Peterson. Richard Peterson. From my desk, I could see Judy, at reception, smiling politely while undoubtedly panicking inside. Her eyes darted toward my office before she responded. Of course, Dr. Peterson. Let me see who's available to assist you today. I took a deep breath and stood up, smoothing down my charcoal pencil skirt, the one I'd purchased after losing 20 pounds in what I now called the divorce diet, the one Richard had never seen. I stepped into the lobby, professional smile fixed firmly in place. I can help Dr. Peterson, Judy, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We have an appointment. At 11, if I'm not mistaken. Richard turned, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and discomfort in rapid succession. He looked older than when he'd left. The California tan he'd acquired couldn't quite hide the new lines around his eyes. His hair, once salt and pepper, was now entirely silver. He'd grown a short beard, something I'd suggested for years that he'd always refused. Eleanor, he managed, recovering quickly. I didn't realize you worked here. For 3 years now, I replied, gesturing toward my office. Please, come in. We have matters to discuss. Richard followed me into my office, his footsteps hesitant behind me. I could feel his eyes scanning the space, taking in the certificates. On the wall, the organized desk, the potted peace lily in the corner, all evidence of a life reconfigured without him in it. Loan officer, he said as he settled into the chair across from my desk. You always did have a head for numbers. I remember when you used to balance the books for my practice before I gave up my career to support yours, I finished. Yes, I recall. However, we're here to discuss your mortgage application, not reminisce. I opened his file and clicked my pen. I have some questions about your financial statements. Richard cleared his throat, shifting in his chair like he used to when one of his dental patients asked about the cost of implants. Is this appropriate? I mean, given our history, should you be handling my application? I looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. The familiar blue that had once been my entire world now seemed like a distant, cold planet. I'm a professional, Richard. I handle all applications according to the same criteria and standards. I tilted my head slightly. Unless you're concerned that your application doesn't meet those standards? No, he said quickly. My finances are in excellent order. It's just unexpected to see you here. You look... His voice trailed off as he seemed to search for an appropriate word. Professional? Competent? Alive? I supplied. Amazing what women can accomplish when they're not standing in their husband's shadow, isn't it? A flash of something, guilt perhaps, crossed his face before he composed himself. You always had potential, Eleanor. I never denied that. You just never encouraged it either, I replied evenly. Now, these withdrawals from your retirement accounts, nearly $300,000 over the past 2 years. Can you explain the purpose? Richard's jaw tightened. Personal expenses, investments. It's all perfectly legitimate. I'm sure it is. However, for a mortgage of this size, we need to verify all significant financial movements, particularly when they impact the assets securing the loan. Since when is my retirement account securing the loan? I have more than enough income. I raised an eyebrow. According to these statements, your income has decreased significantly since selling your practice. The retirement distributions you're taking, combined with these large withdrawals, create a concerning pattern for a long-term loan commitment. Those withdrawals were temporary, one-time expenses. Amber and I had to furnish the new place in San Diego, and then there was the wedding in Bali. My pen paused over the paper. Wedding. Of course there had been a wedding. I'd heard rumors, but somehow, hearing it from him made it real in a way the town gossip hadn't. I see, I said, proud of how neutral my voice remained. And will Mrs. Peterson be on this mortgage application as well? I don't see her financial information included. Richard looked down, suddenly fascinated by the brass paperweight on my desk, a gift from our bank president when I'd secured the Henderson real estate development loan last year. Actually, no. This property is just for me. an investment opportunity. I made a notation in the file. Interesting. The application indicates it will be your primary residence. Well, eventually. Right now, we're still primarily in San Diego. But I plan to split your time? That would make this a second home designation, which carries different lending requirements. The rate would be higher, and we'd need at least 30% down rather than the 20% you've indicated here. Richard frowned. That's not what the agent told me. Real estate agents aren't mortgage underwriters, Richard. They operate on commissions, not financial regulations. I closed the folder. I'll need corrected information before we can proceed. Current address, accurate property designation, and explanation for these withdrawals with supporting documentation. Come on, Eleanor, he said, his voice taking on that cajoling tone he'd used whenever he wanted me to host a dinner party for his colleagues without complaining about the work involved. You know me. You know my finances better than anyone. This is just a formality. I knew you, Richard, and I knew our finances, but according to this application, you now have separate finances with significant changes I need to understand before recommending approval. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Is this really necessary? Or is this about what, Richard? I kept my voice professional despite the anger flaring in my chest. About you leaving your wife of 40 years for a woman barely out of college? About you spending what should have been our retirement on tropical weddings and San Diego condos? No, this isn't about that. This is about Lakeside Financial making sound lending decisions based on accurate information. Richard sat back, a familiar storm gathering in his eyes. I built that retirement fund. Every filling, every crown, every root canal, I earned that money. And now you're spending it. That's your right. But it affects your debt-to-income ratio and your available assets, which affects your loan qualification. That's how mortgages work? He ran a hand through his silver hair, frustration evident in every movement. I never thought you'd be so rigid. Rigid, I repeated. No, Richard. Precise, accurate, thorough. The qualities you used to praise when I managed your practice books but found tiresome when I applied them to our marriage. A tense silence fell between us, 40 years of shared history suddenly compressed. Into the narrow space of my office. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of the bank, the soft conversations, the clicking of computer keys, the whir of the currency counter, while inside, time seemed suspended. Look, Richard finally said. I'm sorry for how things ended between us. It wasn't ideal. Ideal, I echoed. No, abandoning your wife via text message while she's visiting her dying mother in hospice isn't what most people would consider ideal. But we're not here to discuss your departure methods. We're here to discuss this application. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. Eleanor, Ms. Winters, I corrected him. I've resumed my maiden name. Ms. Winters, he repeated, the name awkward on his tongue after 4 decades of calling me by his own. I understand this is uncomfortable. But this property means a lot to me. It's the one we— He stopped abruptly. The one we planned to buy together, I finished for him. Yes, I recognize the address. Oceanfront Lot 42 at Sandpiper Cove. South-facing windows to catch the sunset. Large deck for entertaining. Master bedroom overlooking the water. I recited the features from memory, each one a knife twist. You're still pursuing our retirement dream, just not with me. Richard looked stunned. I didn't think you'd remember all those details. I remember everything, Richard. Including the financial qualification requirements for a $1.2 million mortgage. I handed him a checklist of required documentation. I'll need these items before the investment committee meets next week. Bank statements for the past 6 months, documentation for those withdrawals, current address verification, and an updated property designation form. Next week? Can't we expedite this? The seller has other offers. We follow the same process for all applicants. regardless of their connection to bank employees. Our next committee meeting is Thursday at 2 p.m. If you get me everything by Monday, I can include your application in the review. Richard took the checklist, his fingers brushing against mine in the exchange. Once, that casual contact would have been followed by him catching my hand, bringing it to his lips for a quick kiss. Now, we both recoiled from the accidental touch. "I appreciate your professionalism," he said, standing to leave. "Despite everything." It's not despite everything, Richard. It's because of everything. 3 years ago, I discovered I was capable of rebuilding a life from scratch at 63. Handling a mortgage application from my ex-husband is relatively simple by comparison. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You really have changed." "No," I said quietly. "I've simply remembered who I was before I became Mrs. Richard Peterson." After he left, I sat motionless at my desk, aware of my heart pounding in my chest and the slight tremble in my hands. 3. Years of careful reconstruction threatened to crumble under the weight of a 10-minute conversation. My desk phone buzzed. "Margaret, he's gone," I answered, knowing why she was calling. "Are you okay?" Her voice was gentle, maternal almost, though she was nearly 15 years my junior. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. Then, recognizing the lie, I amended, "I will be fine. It was just unexpected. Do you want me to reassign the file?" No one would question it. I considered the offer. It would be easier, certainly. Safer, emotionally. But I had spent 3 years proving to myself that I was more than Richard Peterson's abandoned wife. Handing off this file would feel like regression. "No, I'll handle it, objectively and professionally." "If you're sure," Margaret said, unconvinced. "But Eleanor, remember what we discussed in your performance review last month? You're too conservative with your approvals. Your denial rate is the highest in the department." "Because I'm thorough," I defended. "Every application I've denied had legitimate red flags. Just make sure this one is evaluated on its actual merits, not on history." After hanging up, I turned to my computer and began typing notes about Richard's application. The withdrawals were concerning from a lending perspective, regardless of their purpose. His income-to-debt ratio was borderline for a loan of this size. The property designation issue would affect the interest rate and down payment requirements, all valid objective concerns that any loan officer would raise. But as I typed, I couldn't help remembering Richard's face when he'd talked about the beach house, the property we had planned to enjoy together in our golden years, the dream that had sustained me through decades of supporting his career, raising our children, and building the life he'd discarded 3 years ago. Now, he wanted to walk into that dream with his new wife on his arm, a woman who probably couldn't even define what a pension plan was. While I sat in this office approving the financing, the injustice of it burned like acid in my throat. I closed the file and pushed back from my desk. Through my office window, I could see Richard in the parking lot, talking on his phone beside his car, a sleek red convertible that replaced the sensible sedan we'd owned. He was gesturing animatedly, his face tight with frustration. Reporting to Amber about the unexpected complication of his ex-wife controlling his mortgage fate, no doubt. My desk phone buzzed again, this time with a call from the front desk. "Eleanor, your 3 o'clock is here early. Mr. Caldwell for the home equity line." "Thank you, Judy. I'll be right out." I stood, straightening my jacket and taking a deep breath. Richard was still visible in the parking lot, now pacing beside his car. For a moment, our eyes met through the window. He stopped pacing, his hand dropping to his side mid-gesture. I nodded once, professionally, then turned away to meet my next client. The Richard Peterson file would need to wait until later. I had other applications to consider, other clients to serve, a career to maintain, a life that continued moving forward, even as pieces of my past resurfaced like debris after a storm. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table, Richard's, file open beside a glass of the Cabernet I'd taught myself to enjoy after decades of deferring to his preference for Chardonnay. The house was quiet except for the soft purring of Fitzgerald, the Maine Coon cat I'd adopted when the empty rooms became too silent after Richard left. In the harsh light of my banker's lamp, the numbers told a clear story. Richard had made a series of financial decisions that compromised his lending profile. The withdrawals, while not catastrophic given the size of his retirement accounts, created a pattern that any cautious lender would question. His income was sufficient for normal living expenses, but stretched thin for a luxury beachfront property, especially if it was a second home with higher interest rates. By every objective measure, this was a loan application with significant red flags. I took a sip of wine, considering what I would have said to Richard back when we shared finances, when his choices were our choices, when his dreams were my dreams, despite me having to abandon mine. I would have cautioned him about overextending. I would have suggested waiting until we had a larger down payment. I would have created a detailed spreadsheet showing how we could make it work if we were patient and careful. But that woman, the supportive, cautious wife who had subordinated her financial acumen to her husband's impulsive desires, no longer existed. In her place sat Eleanor Winters, loan officer, who knew exactly how risky this application was. I closed the file and picked up Fitzgerald, burying my face in his soft fur. What would you do, Fitz? Approve a questionable loan because of history, or deny it for the same reason? Fitzgerald's amber eyes blinked slowly, his purr intensifying as I scratched under his chin. You're right, I murmured. Neither. I'll evaluate it exactly as I would any other application, because that's what professionals do. But as I prepared for bed, hanging up the charcoal pencil skirt and silk blouse that had become my armor in the world I'd built without Richard, I couldn't help wondering if true objectivity was possible when the applicant had once been the center of my universe and had chosen to remove himself from orbit, leaving me spinning alone in the dark. The morning breeze carried the scent of Margaret's too strong perfume into my office before she appeared in the doorway. It was barely 8, but I'd been at my desk since 6:30, combing through Richard's financial statements with the kind of attention I once gave to planning his birthday parties. You're early, Margaret observed, leaning against my doorframe with her oversized coffee mug emblazoned with Boss Lady in glittering letters. Her grown children had given it to her last Christmas, a testament to their understanding of her character. The Peterson file keeping you up? I highlighted another inconsistency in Richard's stated assets versus his documented accounts. I'm just being thorough. Margaret crossed the room and set a paper bag on my desk. Blueberry scone from Hattie's. You missed dinner again last night, didn't you? I had. After reviewing Richard's file, I'd fallen into a rabbit hole of old financial records I'd kept from our marriage. Tax returns, investment statements, property assessments, searching for patterns that might explain how my meticulous husband had suddenly become so financially reckless. Thanks, I said, opening the bag. The buttery scent momentarily overrode my anxiety. And yes, I worked late. Margaret pulled the visitor's chair closer to my desk, settling into it with the determined air of someone planning to stay. Talk. To me, Eleanor. What are you finding? I pushed the file toward her. 3 major withdrawals from his retirement accounts in the past 2 years. Nearly $300,000 total. Then there's this property in San Diego he mentions. Purchased, not rented, but I don't see it listed as an asset or liability. Maybe it's in the new wife's name? Possibly. I took a bite of the scone, not tasting it. But that creates another issue. If they're keeping properties separate, what happens if they separate themselves? His entire financial stability could shift again. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Projecting much? I set down the scone. It's a legitimate concern for any second marriage situation, Margaret. Statistics show that second marriages have an even higher divorce rate than first marriages. For a 30-year mortgage, we have to consider long-term stability. Uh-huh, Margaret said, clearly unconvinced. And has this level of scrutiny been applied to all your second marriage applicants? Or just the one who left you for a yoga instructor? That's not fair. No, what's not fair is you working yourself into exhaustion over this. She leaned forward. Eleanor, you're one of my best loan officers. Your attention to detail has saved this bank from some truly questionable loans. But I need to know that you can handle this particular file without it consuming you. I squared my shoulders. I'm a professional. You're also human. Margaret's voice softened. And humans have these pesky things called feelings, which don't always play nicely with professional judgment. My feelings about Richard have no bearing on the financial realities of his application, I insisted, though the statement felt hollow even to my ears. Margaret stood adjusting her blazer. Prove it. Take today off. What? I have appointments? Which Kevin can cover. She held up a hand, cutting off my protest. You've banked enough overtime in the past month to take a week off. Take today. Go get a massage or drink wine with Susan, whatever you normally do when you're not here being Superwoman. I started to argue but recognized the set of Margaret's jaw. She hadn't become the youngest branch manager in Lakeside Financial's history. By backing down easily. Fine, I conceded. One day. But I want to be at the committee meeting on Thursday when his application is reviewed. Of course. I wouldn't dare deprive the committee of your insights. Margaret's phone chirped with a message. She glanced at it, then back at me. Now go. Before the morning rush starts and you find 17 reasons why you're irreplaceable. 40 minutes later, I was standing in my walk-in closet, staring blankly at rows of clothes that told the story of my transformation. On the left, the remnants of my former life, sensible slacks and comfortable cardigans selected for a life of school volunteering, charity committees, and being Dr. Peterson's appropriate wife. On the right, the wardrobe I'd built since returning to banking, structured blazers, sleek dresses, and the pencil skirts that had become my professional signature. What did one wear for an unexpected day off devoted to not thinking about one's ex-husband? This is ridiculous, I muttered to Fitzgerald, who was sprawled across my unmade bed. For 40 years, my days had been structured around others' needs. First Richard's, then our children's, then our grandchildren's. When Richard left, the crushing void of unscheduled time had nearly broken me. I'd rebuilt my life hour by hour, developing routines and habits that filled the endless days. Work had been my salvation, providing purpose and community when loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. And now, faced with an empty Tuesday stretching, before me I felt the familiar panic rising. My phone rang, delivering a reprieve. Susan, Margaret called me, she said without preamble when I answered. Said you need an intervention before you work yourself into an early grave over Richard's mortgage. Susan Hayes had been my best friend since we served together on the hospital auxiliary board 15 years ago. When Richard left, she had shown up at my door with a bottle of whiskey and a promise. We'll get through this. She had kept that promise, dragging me from despair one coffee date, one movie night, one weekend trip at a time. Margaret is overreacting, I said, moving to the kitchen to refill my coffee cup. I'm simply doing my job thoroughly. Mm-hmm. And I'm simply taking you to the sanctuary today. Lisa had a cancellation, so you're getting the works. Massage, facial, that seaweed wrap thing you pretend to hate but actually love. Susan, I can't just, you can, and you will. I've already paid, and you know how cheap I am. I'll be there. In 30 minutes. Wear something easy to change out of. She hung up before I could argue further. The sanctuary was Oak Ridge's only luxury spa, housed in a converted Victorian mansion on the edge of town. Lisa, the owner, had started it after her own divorce, transforming her settlement money into a thriving business. She greeted us in the lavender-scented lobby, her silver hair twisted into an elegant knot. Eleanor, Susan mentioned you were coming in. It's been ages. 3 months, I specified. I'd treated myself to a massage after securing the Henderson loan. I've been busy. Too busy, Susan interjected. She's working 16-hour days analyzing her ex-husband's financial statements. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. Richard came to you for a loan? That's either cosmic justice or cruel and unusual punishment. It wasn't intentional, I explained, though I'd been wondering the same thing. Lakeside is the main mortgage lender in the area for high-value properties. It was statistically inevitable our paths would cross eventually. Statistics, Susan scoffed. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, that's what it is. Lisa led us through the hushed hallways to the relaxation room, where plush chairs faced a wall of windows overlooking meticulously landscaped gardens. Whatever brought you here, we'll make sure you leave feeling better than when you arrived. 2 hours later, covered in seaweed and wrapped in heated blankets like some exotic culinary experiment, I finally allowed myself to relax. The therapist had worked out knots in my shoulders I hadn't even realized were there, and the warm weight of the wrap was oddly comforting. Ready to talk about it? Susan asked from the next table, similarly encased in green goo. Talk about what? I stalled, though I knew exactly what she meant. Eleanor. Her tone brooked no avoidance. You've been obsessing over Richard's mortgage application for days. Margaret said you were at the office before sunrise. This isn't just professional thoroughness. I stared at the ceiling, watching the play of light through bamboo blinds. The application has legitimate issues. I'm sure it does. But that's not why you're losing sleep. A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft instrumental music piped through hidden speakers. It's the beach house, I finally admitted, my voice barely audible over the gentle flute melody. He's buying our beach house. Susan turned her head toward me, the paper beneath her crinkling with the movement. Your beach house? The one you two were always talking about? The very same. Oceanfront lot, 42 at Sandpiper Cove. I swallowed. Hard. We had the whole thing planned. I even had a folder of design ideas. Richard used to tease me about it, said I was more excited about the kitchen cabinets than the view. Oh, Eleanor. Susan's voice was heavy with empathy. That's cruel, karmic, ironic, I supplied. Take your pick. I was going to say painful. Susan was quiet for a moment. Does he realize what he's doing? Of course he does. He specifically referenced our former plans in the meeting. I turned to look at her. He's buying our retirement dream and moving into it with his 20-something wife. And he wants me to approve the loan. Can you? Approve it, I mean. I turned back to the ceiling. That's the question, isn't it? Professionally, there are enough red flags that I could legitimately deny it. The withdrawals, the unclear status of the San Diego property, the second, home designation issue. Any one of those would be enough to send the application back for clarification. But personally, I want to stamp denied across it in red ink the size of Texas. Susan laughed, a warm sound that momentarily lightened the weight in my chest. That would be satisfying. Briefly, I agreed, until the Regulatory Review Board questioned why I used a novelty stamp not approved in our procedures manual. Always the rule follower. Susan's tone was affectionate. Except that one time in Sedona when you insisted we sneak onto that resort property to use their hot tub. That was your idea. Maybe. But you were the one who charmed that security guard when he caught us. The memory made me smile despite myself. That weekend trip to Sedona had been 3 months after Richard left, my first tentative step toward reclaiming joy. Susan had insisted we get out of town, away from pitying glances and well-meaning casseroles. My point, Susan continued, is that you've always had this wild streak beneath all that propriety. Richard leaving didn't create it. It just uncovered it. I considered this. And what exactly does my wild streak have to do with his mortgage? Application? Nothing, and everything. Susan shifted beneath her seaweed blanket. You spent 40 years making your decisions in relation to Richard. What he wanted, what he needed, what would make him happy. Now you have a chance to make a decision about Richard based solely on what you think is right. But that's exactly what I'm struggling with, I admitted. What's right? Approving a questionable loan because denying it might seem like revenge? Or denying a questionable loan because approving it might seem like I'm still trying to please him? Maybe the right answer is whatever helps you sleep at night 6 months from now. What decision can you live with long term? Before I could respond, the therapist returned to check on our treatments, effectively ending the conversation. But Susan's question lingered as we were unwrapped, rinsed, and moved to the next phase of our spa day. What decision could I live with? By late afternoon, more relaxed than I'd been in weeks, I returned home to find Richard's file still spread across my kitchen table where I'd left it. I hadn't intended to bring it home, but after his unexpected appearance at the bank, I'd wanted to review everything without the distractions of the office. I made a cup of tea and sat down, not to analyze the numbers again, but to think about Susan's question. The truth was, I had spent 40 years making decisions with Richard's happiness as the primary consideration. His career had always taken precedence over mine. His preferences had shaped our home, our social circle, even our vacation destinations. I had been so adept at anticipating his needs that he rarely had to ask for anything. It was simply provided, before he realized he wanted it, and despite my constant accommodation, he had left. A text message while I sat at my mother's hospice bedside. 40 years dismissed in 40 words. My tea grew cold as I stared at the file without really seeing it. A memory surfaced. Richard and me, 20 years ago, walking along Sandpiper Cove. Beach at sunset. We'd just toured the development, though the lot we wanted wasn't on the market yet. One day, he'd said, his arm around my waist, we'll watch this sunset from our own deck, and you'll finally have the kitchen of your dreams. I'd leaned into him, believing in that promise with every fiber of my being. I can wait. Some dreams are worth waiting for. I had waited. For 4 decades, I had put my dreams on hold while supporting his. And now, at 66, I was finally living for myself. Building a career I'd abandoned. Making decisions based on my own judgment. Sleeping in the middle of the bed because there was no one to share it with. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. Through the front window, I saw Richard's red convertible parked at the curb. My stomach clenched. Taking a deep breath, I went to the door, conscious that I was wearing yoga pants and a faded Oak Ridge Library Fun Run t-shirt rather than the professional armor I'd worn yesterday. Richard stood on the porch, a manila envelope in his hands, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. His eyes widened slightly at my casual appearance. Eleanor. He stopped, correcting himself. Ms. Winters, I hope I'm not disturbing you. What are you doing here, Richard? I didn't invite him in. This house, purchased after selling the family home that held too many memories, was my sanctuary. I wasn't ready to have him step inside it. He held up the envelope. I have the additional documentation you requested. Bank statements, explanations for the withdrawals, everything. I was going to drop them at the bank, but Judy mentioned you'd taken the day off. So you decided to come to my home? I crossed my arms. The bank opens at 9 tomorrow. The documents would have been perfectly fine waiting until then. The seller needs an answer by Friday, Richard explained, a hint of desperation in his voice. If I wait until tomorrow to submit these, will there be enough time for review before Thursday's committee meeting? My professional instincts kicked in despite my irritation. He was right. Leaving the documents until morning would delay the process. Fine, I said, holding out my hand for the envelope. I'll review them tonight. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. I appreciate your flexibility. I took the envelope, careful not to let our fingers touch. Is that all? He hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Actually, I was hoping we could talk about the property. I don't think that's appropriate, given my role in evaluating your application. Not about the application, he clarified. About why this property is important to me. I should have said no. Should have closed the door and maintained the professional boundary I'd established. But curiosity, or perhaps some masochistic impulse, made me step back. 10 minutes, I conceded. We can talk on the deck. My backyard was nothing like the oceanfront view of Lot 42, but I'd transformed it into a private garden sanctuary in the past 3 years. Native plants, a small pond with koi, and a covered deck with comfortable seating had become my evening retreat. Leading Richard through the house, I was acutely aware of his eyes taking in the changes I'd made, the bold paint colors he would have vetoed, the abstract art that replaced traditional landscapes, the bookshelves filled with titles I'd finally had time to read. On the deck, I took the chair that gave me the best view of my garden, leaving Richard the seat facing the house. A small power play, but satisfying nonetheless. "You've done amazing things with this place," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "The garden especially." "Thank you. What did you want to discuss about the property?" Richard sighed, recognizing my refusal to engage in small talk. "I wanted to explain why I'm buying it." "I think that's fairly obvious," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "It's a prime location with an exceptional view. Anyone would want it." "It's not just that." Richard leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Eleanor, I know how much that property meant to you, to us. The plans we made, the future we imagined there. And yet, here you are, trying to buy it without me." I kept my expression neutral. "What exactly do you think needs explaining?" "I'm not buying it to hurt you," he said quietly. "Or to replace our memories with new ones." "Then why?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Why that specific property, Richard? There are dozens of oceanfront lots along the coast." He looked down at his hands, surgeon's hands, I had always called them, though he was only a dentist. Precise, steady, capable of both healing and harm. Because it reminds me of who I was before I made the biggest mistake of my life. The statement hung in the air between us, unexpected and unwelcome. I had spent 3 years rebuilding myself from the wreckage of our marriage, carefully excising any hope of reconciliation. I didn't want to hear that Richard regretted his choices now, after I'd finally learned to live without him. "Your 10 minutes are up," I said, standing abruptly. "I have these documents to review before tomorrow." "Eleanor, please." "No," I cut him off. "I don't want to hear about your regrets or your mistakes. You made your choice 3 years ago. You don't get to unburden your conscience now just because you need my professional approval for a loan." Richard rose slowly, looking suddenly older than his 68 years. "That's not why I'm telling you this." "It doesn't matter why," I said firmly. "What matters is that I have a job to do, and you're making it unnecessarily complicated with these personal revelations." "I thought you might want to know." "What I want," I interrupted, "is to maintain professional boundaries while I evaluate your application. What I want is to do my job without having to navigate an emotional minefield. What I want, Richard, is for you to respect that I've built a life that doesn't revolve around your needs or your regrets." He stepped back, surprise evident in his expression. In 40 years of marriage, I had rarely spoken to him with such direct force. I had been the mediator, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts with compromise and understanding. But that Eleanor had died the day he texted, "I can't do this anymore. I've met someone else. Amber understands me in ways you never could. I'll send someone for my things." I'm sorry, he said finally. You're right. This was inappropriate. Yes, it was. I gestured toward the house. I'll see you out. As we walked back through the living room, Fitzgerald appeared, stretching lazily before fixing Richard with an unblinking feline stare. You got a cat? Richard observed, sounding genuinely surprised. I got many things after you left, I replied. A cat, a career, a backbone. At the front door, Richard paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry, Eleanor. Not just for coming here today, but for everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd arrived. The California tan couldn't hide the deep lines around his eyes. The silver hair and trendy beard couldn't disguise the downward turn of his mouth. He looked like a man who had everything he thought he wanted and found it hollow. Your apology is noted, I said evenly. But it's 3 years too late to matter. After he left, I returned to the kitchen table where his file waited. Opening the manila envelope, I found meticulously organized documents, bank statements, property records, explanations for each of the withdrawals highlighted in my earlier review. The first major withdrawal, $120,000, had gone toward a down payment on the San Diego condo, which was in fact titled solely in Amber's name. The second, $95,000, had funded their Bali wedding and extended honeymoon. The third, $78,000, had covered unexpected medical expenses that weren't further explained. I frowned, making a note to request clarification on the medical expenses. If Richard was facing health issues, that could impact his long-term ability to repay the loan. Or if the expenses were for Amber, that could indicate future financial obligations not accounted for in the application. Working methodically through the documents, I found answers to many of my questions, but discovered new issues as well. The San Diego property arrangement was particularly concerning from a lending perspective. If Richard had contributed the down payment, but the title was in Amber's name only, he had essentially gifted a substantial sum without securing his interest in the property. Not my problem, I reminded myself. Except that it was, because his unprotected assets affected his overall financial stability, which directly impacted his loan qualification. By the time I'd reviewed everything, night had fallen. I sat in my darkened kitchen, the banker's lamp casting a small pool of light on the scattered papers. Fitzgerald jumped onto the table, settling himself directly on top of Richard's completed checklist. What do you think, Fitz? I asked, scratching behind his ears. Is he making terrible financial decisions because he's trying to keep a younger woman happy? Or is something else going on? Fitzgerald purred non-committally. I gathered the papers, returning them to their folder. My professional assessment was clear. Richard's application had serious issues that needed to be addressed before approval could be recommended. His assets were tied up in ways that created vulnerability. His income was sufficient, but not robust for a loan of this size. The property designation confusion needed resolution. But beneath the professional evaluation, something else nagged at me. Richard's comment on the deck, about the property reminding him of who he was before his biggest mistake, echoed in my mind. Combined with the unexplained medical expenses and the strange property arrangement in San Diego, it painted a picture I couldn't quite bring into focus. What wasn't Richard telling me? And more importantly, why did I still care? Wednesday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that matched my mood. Rain lashed against my kitchen windows as I stared into my coffee cup, Richard's file already open beside my breakfast. Sleep had been elusive. My mind caught in an endless loop of financial calculations and fragmented memories. My phone chimed with a text from Margaret. Committee meeting moved up to 10 a.m. tomorrow. Peterson file review first on agenda. Decision. Required. The accelerated timeline sent a jolt of anxiety through me. 24 hours to finalize my recommendation. 24 hours to decide whether Richard's dream home, our dream home, would become his reality with his new wife. I texted back, "Understood. Will be prepared." The drive to Lakeside Financial took twice as long as usual, the rain reducing. Visibility to mere yards. By the time I arrived, my carefully styled hair was damp despite my umbrella, and my mood had deteriorated further. Kevin, our youngest loan officer, intercepted me in the hallway. "Eleanor, thank goodness you're here. I covered your McPherson appointment yesterday, but they had questions about the construction loan terms that I couldn't answer." I barely registered his concerns. "Schedule them for Friday. I need today clear." "But they're in a time crunch with the builder." "Friday, Kevin," I repeated, more sharply than intended. His expression fell, and I immediately regretted my tone. These past few days, I'd been treating everyone like collateral damage in the private war between my professionalism and my past. "I'm sorry," I amended. "I have a complicated file to finalize before tomorrow's committee meeting. Can you check if Margaret can see them this afternoon instead?" Kevin's relief was palpable. "Will do, and, there's someone waiting in your office." "What? Who?" I hadn't scheduled any appointments, determined to focus solely on Richard's file today. "She wouldn't give her name, just said she needed to speak with you about an application under review." Kevin lowered his voice. "She's very yoga instructor looking." My stomach dropped. Amber. It had to be. How long has she been waiting? "About 20 minutes. Margaret said to put her in your office rather than the lobby. Something about avoiding. A scene? Perfect." Not only was Richard's child bride waiting in my personal space, but Margaret had anticipated drama. My professional reputation was teetering on the edge of a soap opera cliff. "Thank you, Kevin. I'll handle it." Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and walked to my office with measured steps. Through the glass door, I could see her, slender, and impossibly young, with the kind of effortless beauty that made my carefully maintained appearance feel like a desperate charade. She was examining the framed certifications on my wall, a curtain of glossy chestnut hair falling over one shoulder. As I entered, she turned, and I was struck by eyes the precise color of Caribbean waters, the waters visible from Lot 42, in fact. The universe's sense of humor was truly exquisite. "Ms. Winters?" Her voice was softer than I expected, with a slight tremor that surprised me. "I'm Amber Peterson." Of course she'd taken his name. The name I'd carried for 40 years and discarded like a too-heavy coat after he left. "Mrs. Peterson," I acknowledged, taking my seat behind the desk. The barrier of polished mahogany between us was flimsy protection, but I'd take what I could get. "What can I do for you?" She sat down, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready for flight. Up close, she looked even younger than 29, barely older than my oldest grandchild. The thought twisted something painful inside me. "I know. This is unusual," she began, her hands twisting in her lap. "But I needed to speak with you about Richard's mortgage application." "I'm afraid I can't discuss client applications with anyone not listed on the paperwork," I replied, falling gratefully into professional protocol. "Banking regulations—" "I know about the beach house," she interrupted. "I know it was supposed to be yours." The direct hit left me momentarily speechless. "Mrs. Peterson," I managed finally, "whatever personal history exists between your husband and me has no bearing on my professional assessment of his loan application." "But it does," she insisted. "He's obsessed with it, with making this right somehow." "Making what right?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Amber looked down at her hands, smooth, unlined hands that had never known decades of dishwashing, child-rearing, or gardening with hard well water. "He's not well, Ms. Winters." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't on the list. "Not well?" "The medical expenses in his financial records," she continued. "They weren't for me. They were for experimental treatments in Arizona. Treatments the insurance wouldn't cover. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Treatments for what? Early onset Alzheimer's. He was diagnosed 6 months before he left me for you, I finished, my voice remarkably steady considering the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Amber flinched. Yes. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process this information. Richard was ill. Seriously ill. And he hadn't told me, his wife of 4 decades, before walking out of our marriage. Why are you telling me this? Because his application matters more than you know. She raised her eyes to meet mine. The beach house isn't for us. It's for him. A place he can be safe when things progress. My mind was struggling to rearrange the pieces of the puzzle. I don't understand. If he needs a safe place, why not stay in San Diego? Why buy an isolated beach property for someone with a degenerative neurological condition? Amber's eyes filled with tears. Because of the clinical trial at West Shore Medical, they're only accepting local residents. It's his best hope for slowing the progression. West Shore Medical was just 20 minutes from Sandpiper Cove. One of the country's leading research hospitals. They specialized in neurological disorders. I had served on their community advisory board for years, though I'd stepped down after Richard left, unable to face the colleagues who had known us as a couple. So this move is for medical treatment, I clarified, my loan officer brain automatically categorizing this new information, not a lifestyle choice. Yes, the San Diego property is being sold. We've already accepted an offer. She pulled a folder from her bag, identical to the ones we used at Lakeside. Here's the documentation. The sale proceeds will cover most of the down payment for the beach house, but we need the mortgage to complete the purchase. I accepted the folder automatically, but didn't open it. Why isn't this information in Richard's application? Amber looked away. He didn't want you to know about the diagnosis. He said it would be manipulative. Manipulative, I repeated. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. He doesn't want charity, she clarified. Especially, not from you. I almost laughed at the absurdity. After 40 years together, Richard was concerned about appearing manipulative? After leaving me via text message while I watched my mother die, he was worried about my perception of his motives? Mrs. Peterson, I said, my professional mask firmly back in place. While I appreciate the additional context, loan approvals are based on financial qualifications, not personal circumstances. Richard's medical condition, while unfortunate, doesn't change the fundamental issues with his application. Something flashed in her Caribbean eyes, a hardness I hadn't expected from her delicate appearance. You're going to deny it, aren't you? Because of me. Because he left you for me. I haven't made my final determination, I replied evenly. But if I do recommend denial, it will be because the application doesn't meet our lending requirements, not because of any personal history. You don't believe me. It wasn't a question. What I believe is irrelevant. What matters are the numbers, the documentation, and the risk assessment. Amber stood abruptly. He was right. You always were cold underneath all that perfect wife exterior. Numbers and rules and proper appearances, that's all that ever mattered to you. The attack stung more than it should have. You don't know me, Mrs. Peterson. You know whatever version of me Richard has constructed to justify his choices. I know he's dying, she shot back, her voice cracking. And I know he wants to fix what he broke before it's too late. That beach house was your dream together, and he's trying to make sure it still happens, even if he won't be there to share it with you. My confusion must have shown on my face because Amber sighed, some of the fire leaving her expression. You really don't know, do you? She reached into her bag again and pulled out a thick legal document, Richard changed his will last month. If this loan is approved and we purchase the property, it transfers to you upon his death. He's even arranged for maintenance funds to be held in trust. I stared at the document she placed on my desk, unable to process what she was saying. That's not possible. Ask your lawyer to verify it. The trust is irrevocable. Amber gathered her things, her movements jerky with emotion. He's not expecting to survive more than a few years, Ms. Winters. The diagnosis is aggressive. All he wants is a chance at this clinical trial and to leave knowing he gave you the one thing you always wanted. She moved toward the door, then turned back. I know what you think of me, the yoga instructor who stole your husband. But it wasn't like that. I was his caregiver first, hired by his practice partner after the initial symptoms appeared. The rest, it just happened. And now I'm committed to seeing this through, however it ends. After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the documents she'd left behind. The San Diego property sale, the amended will, the medical records I had no right to see but couldn't bring myself to ignore. The diagnosis was there in cold medical terminology. Early onset Alzheimer's with rapid progression, initial symptoms including impulsivity, personality changes, and poor judgment. Prognosis: 3 to 5 years. My hands shook as I closed the file. The timeline matched perfectly. Richard's increasingly erratic behavior in the months before he left. The uncharacteristic financial decisions. The cruel text message that had seemed so at odds with the man I'd known for 40 years. A soft knock at my door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Margaret. Everything okay? She asked, though her expression made it clear she already knew the answer. Did you know? I demanded. About Richard's condition? Margaret sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. Not until this morning. Amber called me, said she was coming to see you. I thought you should hear it from her rather than through town gossip. Town gossip? How many people know about this? More than you'd think, fewer than there could be. Richard has been careful, but people notice things, especially when Bill Taylor at the pharmacy isn't as discreet as he should be about prescription patterns. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This changes everything. Does it? Margaret challenged gently. From a lending perspective? The question brought me back to solid ground. No, I conceded. His financial situation is still problematic for a loan of this size. The property sale helps with the down payment, but his income stability is compromised by his condition. The medical expenses will likely increase. The San Diego property being in Amber's name means Eleanor. Margaret's voice cut through my clinical assessment. Take a breath. You don't have to decide right now. But I did have to decide. Tomorrow's committee meeting loomed, demanding a recommendation that would now carry impossible weight. Not just a mortgage approval, but potentially Richard's last chance at effective treatment. His final attempt to make amends for the way he'd ended our marriage. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. Can you clear my schedule for the rest of the day? Margaret nodded. Already done. I figured you'd need time after meeting with her. She hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I think she really loves him, despite everything. The thought was both comforting and excruciating. I'd spent 3 years painting Amber as a predatory homewrecker in my mind, the villain in the story of my abandoned marriage. The idea that she might genuinely care for Richard, might be facing the devastating reality of losing a husband to dementia at barely 30 years old, was almost too complicated to bear. Thank you, Margaret. I gathered my purse and the files Amber had left. I'll see you at the committee meeting tomorrow. Eleanor, Margaret called as I reached the door. Whatever you decide, make peace with it, for your own sake. The rain had stopped by the time I left the bank, though dark clouds still hung heavy over Oak Ridge. Without conscious decision, I found myself driving toward the coast, toward Sandpiper Cove. Toward Lot 42. The development had expanded since Richard and I first visited years ago. What had once been an ambitious plan sketched on developers' blueprints was now a thriving community of luxury homes, each angled to maximize ocean views. Lot 42 sat slightly apart from the others, on a natural promontory that jutted into the bay. Construction had already begun, foundation poured, framing partially. Complete. A massive builder's sign announced "Future Home of Peterson Residents," with a rendering of the finished structure. Modern lines, walls of glass, expansive decks. Not at all the craftsman-style cottage I had imagined in my design folders all those years ago. I parked along the access road and walked to the edge of the property. From this vantage point, the view was even more spectacular than I remembered. The bay spread before me, sunlight occasionally breaking through the clouds to dance across the water's surface. To the north, densely forested hills rolled toward the horizon. To the south, the distant outline of Oak Ridge was just visible on a clear day like today. It's changed a lot since we were here last. I whirled to find Richard standing a few yards away, hands in the pockets of his cargo pants, the wind ruffling his silver hair. He looked tired, the lines in his face deeper than they'd been just yesterday. "What are you doing here?" I asked, though it was a foolish question. Of course he would visit the construction site of his future home. "I come every day," he replied, simply. "To check progress. To make sure they're following the plans." He hesitated. "To remember." I turned back to the view, unable to look at him while processing everything I'd learned. "Amber came to see me today." Richard sighed, moving to stand beside me, though keeping a respectful distance. "I told her not to do that. She told me about your diagnosis." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of waves against the rocks below and seagulls wheeling overhead. "I didn't want you to know," he finally said. "Not like this." "When were you planning to tell me?" "After the mortgage was approved? After construction was finished? Or were you just going to wait until I received notice from your estate attorney?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. 3 years of careful rebuilding threatened to crumble under the weight of this new reality. "I wasn't thinking clearly when I left," Richard said quietly. "The symptoms were already affecting my judgment, though I didn't realize it at the time. By the time I understood what was happening, too much damage had been done. I thought it would be cruel to come back into your life with my diagnosis, asking for forgiveness that I didn't deserve." I turned to look at him directly. "So, instead, you decided to secretly buy our dream house and leave it to me in your will, without ever telling me why you really left?" "It sounds absurd when you put it that way," he admitted. "But in my increasingly faulty mind, it made sense. A way to give you what I'd promised without disrupting the new life you'd built without me." "And the mortgage application? You must have known it would come to me eventually." Richard looked away. "I hoped it would go to Kevin or one of the other loan officers. When I saw you at the bank, it wasn't part of the plan." "The plan," I repeated. This elaborate scheme to die and leave me a beach house as some sort of apology. "Not an apology," he corrected. "A fulfillment of a promise, the last promise I'll be able to keep." The clinical detachment with which he discussed his impending death sent a chill through me. "The clinical trial at West Shore. How promising is it?" 30% chance of slowing progression by up to 2 years. Better odds than doing nothing." "And Amber?" I couldn't believe I was asking about her, but somehow it seemed important. "She's prepared for what's coming?" A ghost of a smile crossed Richard's face. "As much as anyone can be. She has no illusions. When I tried to set her free after the diagnosis was confirmed, she refused to go, said she'd signed on for the journey, whatever it looked like. The parallels to our own marriage vows were too pointed to ignore. For better, for worse," I murmured. "In sickness and in health." The irony isn't lost on me, Richard acknowledged. I abandoned those vows with you, only to have someone else honor them with me when things got truly difficult. We stood in silence for a moment, the wind picking up around us, carrying the scent of salt and impending rain. This isn't the house. Design we planned, I said finally, nodding toward the partially constructed frame. No. Richard looked up at the modern structure taking shape. You always wanted craftsmen, warm woods and river stone fireplaces, window seats and built-in bookshelves. But you're building this ultra-modern glass box instead. Because it's not for me, he said simply. It's for you. And you've changed. I frowned. What do you mean? The Eleanor I left wouldn't have returned to banking. Wouldn't have bought abstract art or painted her living room that amazing shade of blue. Wouldn't have adopted a Maine Coon or started yoga classes with Susan. At my surprised look, he shrugged. It's a small town, people talk, and I've been keeping track, even if you didn't know it. So you designed a house for who you think I'm now? I designed a house for who you've allowed yourself to become without me holding you back. Light and space and openness, views from every room, a kitchen that would make professional chefs envious. A master suite with a soaking tub overlooking the bay. He gestured to different areas of the construction. No formal dining room because you always hated those obligatory dinner parties. No fussy crown molding that's impossible to dust. Just clean lines and endless horizons. The thought he had put into it, the attention to who I was now, not who I had been in our marriage, was unexpectedly moving. And yet, the entire premise remained deeply troubling. Richard, even if I approved your mortgage application, which I haven't decided on yet, I can't accept a house purchased with your money and left to me in your will. It's inappropriate, doesn't begin to cover it. It's not my money, he countered. It's our money, 40 years of shared finances, the retirement we planned together. I'm just making sure it goes where it was always intended to go. And Amber? What does she get in this grand scheme? Financial security. The San Diego condo proceeds are being held in trust for her future needs, plus a life insurance policy. That should ensure she never has to worry about money again. I shook my head, overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. This is too much. You can't just rewrite the ending to our story without my consent. I'm not rewriting the ending, Richard said softly. I'm acknowledging that I got the middle chapters terribly wrong. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and fat raindrops began to fall, signaling the return of the storm. Richard looked up at the darkening sky. You should go. It's going to pour any minute. And you? I'll stay a little longer. I like watching the water during storms. I nodded, remembering this quirk from our marriage. During thunderstorms, Richard would often stand on our back porch, seemingly mesmerized by the interplay of lightning and rain. I had always called him inside, worried about lightning strikes. Now, I wondered how many moments of joy he had sacrificed to my constant caution. The committee meets at 10 tomorrow, I said, already turning toward my car. I'll have a decision by then. Eleanor, he called as I walked away. Whatever you decide about the mortgage, I want you to know something. I paused but didn't turn around. Leaving you was the worst mistake of my life, with or without the diagnosis. I just wish I'd realized it before I threw away 40 years for what turned out to be a desperate attempt to outrun my own mortality. The rain began to fall in earnest as I reached my car. Through the gathering downpour, I could still make out Richard's silhouette, standing at the edge of Lot 42, facing the turbulent sea. Driving home, windshield wipers struggling against the deluge, I fought to untangle the knot of emotions that threatened to choke me. Anger at Richard's deception, pity for his condition, reluctant admiration for Amber's commitment, and beneath it all, a bewildering sense of loss, not just for the marriage that had ended 3 years ago, but for the future that Richard's illness would steal from all of us. By the time I reached home, I was soaked from the short dash from car to front door. Fitzgerald greeted me with his typical disdain for my wet condition, watching from the hallway as I dripped onto the entryway tiles. "Don't judge me, Fitz," I told him as I peeled off my rain jacket. "It's been a complicated day." In dry clothes with a glass of wine, I sat at my kitchen table and spread out all the files: the original mortgage application, the additional documents Richard had provided, and now the medical records and estate information from Amber. The clinical picture was complete, and yet I felt more confused than ever. Professionally, the loan still presented problems. Richard's condition created significant uncertainty about his long-term ability to meet payment obligations. The property designation issue remained unresolved. The rapid drawdown of retirement assets for medical expenses, while completely understandable, created a troubling trend from a lending perspective. But personally, I was adrift in uncharted waters. The neat categories of victim and villain I had constructed to make sense of our divorce were dissolving, leaving a messier, more human reality in their place. Richard wasn't simply the husband who had abandoned me. He was a man facing his own mortality, trying in his imperfect way to make amends. Amber wasn't just the young temptress who had stolen my husband. She was a caregiver facing the devastating prospect of losing her partner to a merciless disease. And I wasn't just the wronged wife seeking professional revenge. I was a woman with choices to make, choices that would define not just Richard's remaining years, but my own future as well. The committee meeting loomed just hours away. I needed to make a decision that I could defend professionally and live with personally. The problem was that those two standards seemed increasingly at odds. I picked up my phone and called the one person who had seen me through every crisis of the past 3 years. "Susan, it's me. I need your help with something." The investment committee room felt unusually warm as I arranged my files on the polished conference table. Through the wall of windows, Oak Ridge sparkled in the morning sunshine, yesterday's storm having cleansed everything to a pristine brightness that felt almost mocking given the turmoil inside me. "Coffee?" Margaret appeared at my elbow with 2 steaming mugs, setting one in front of me. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. The ceramic burned against my palms, a tangible sensation to anchor me in this surreal morning. "Susan and I were up until 2 working through this." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "And what conclusion did you reach?" Before I could answer, the conference room door opened, and the other committee members began filing in. Jackson Cooper from Commercial Lending, his bow tie slightly askew as always. Diane Mercer from Risk Management, already scrolling through her tablet. Thomas Wright, our compliance officer, meticulously arranging his legal pad and 3 different colored pens. And finally, Harold Greenwood, the bank president, whose presence at a routine mortgage committee meeting was unusual enough to raise whispers among the others. Harold nodded in my direction. "Eleanor, I understand you have a complex case for us today." So Margaret had briefed him. Of course she had. This wasn't just another mortgage application, it was a potential minefield of personal and professional complications. "Yes, sir. The Peterson application." Harold settled at the head of the table, folding his hands in front of him. "Before we begin, I want to be clear about something. This committee evaluates applications based solely on financial merit and institutional risk. Personal relationships between applicants and bank employees have no bearing on our decisions." His pointed look in my direction made it clear that this reminder was for my benefit. I nodded, grateful for the professional frame he was establishing. "With that in mind," Harold continued, "Eleanor, please present your findings and recommendation." Taking a deep breath, I opened the file. The application before us is from Richard Peterson for a $1.2 million mortgage on a beachfront property at Sandpiper Cove, Lot 42. The property is currently under construction, with completion estimated in 4 months. I kept my voice steady. focusing on the facts rather than the emotions swirling beneath them. Mr. Peterson is 68 years old, retired from his dental practice 3 years ago. His income consists primarily of retirement distributions and investments. Initial review identified several areas of concern. I methodically outlined the issues: the large withdrawals from retirement accounts, the property designation confusion, the income-to-debt ratio concerns. The committee listened attentively, occasionally making notes but asking no questions. Subsequent to my initial review, additional documentation was provided. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. This documentation included medical records indicating Mr. Peterson has been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease with an aggressive progression pattern. A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Diane looked up sharply from her tablet. Thomas stopped writing mid-sentence. The diagnosis explains several of the financial patterns observed in the application, I continued. The large withdrawals were primarily for experimental medical treatments not covered by insurance. Additionally, Mr. Peterson is pursuing inclusion in a clinical trial at West Shore Medical, which requires participants to have a primary residence within 30 miles of the facility. That explains the urgency of the application, Margaret added. The trial begins in 2 months. I nodded. Correct. There's also the matter of the San Diego property, which is being sold. Documentation shows a pending sale with expected proceeds of $850,000, which would substantially offset the requested loan amount. Harold leaned forward. Given these factors, what is your recommendation, Eleanor? The moment of truth had arrived. I'd spent the entire night weighing options, analyzing scenarios, and trying to reconcile my professional judgment with my personal ethics. Susan had been invaluable, challenging my thinking without telling me what to decide. In the end, the decision had to be mine. Based on thorough analysis, I began, I recommend conditional approval of the application. A surprised murmur ran through the room. After my detailed enumeration of the application's problems, this wasn't the recommendation they'd expected. Conditional on what terms? Harold asked, his expression giving nothing away. First, designation of the property as a primary residence, with documentation of the San Diego sale. Second, a medical lien provision that addresses the applicant's condition and ensures loan servicing in the event of incapacity. Third, a larger down payment, at least 35% rather than the standard 20%, to offset the risk profile. I closed the folder, meeting Harold's eyes directly. With these conditions, the application meets our risk thresholds while accommodating the applicant's legitimate medical needs. Harold studied me for a long moment. And you're confident this recommendation is based solely on financial considerations? No, I replied honestly, drawing startled looks from around the table. It's impossible to completely separate the human element from financial decisions of this magnitude. What I can say with certainty is that I've applied the same rigorous analysis to this application that I would to any other, while acknowledging the unique circumstances involved. A charged silence fell over the room. Harold turned to the others. Comments? Questions? Diane spoke first. The medical lien provision is unusual but appropriate given the circumstances. I support it. Thomas flipped through his notes. From a compliance standpoint, we're on solid ground if we document the reasoning thoroughly. The medical accommodation is consistent with our fair lending policies. Jackson adjusted his bow tie, looking uncomfortable. I'm concerned about setting a precedent. Are we suggesting that medical diagnoses should regularly factor into lending decisions? Not at all, I clarified. We're acknowledging that this specific medical situation has direct financial implications that our standard evaluation process doesn't adequately address. The conditions I've proposed are designed to mitigate the financial risks while recognizing the legitimate purpose of the loan. And if the applicant doesn't agree to these conditions, Harold asked, then the application should be denied, I said firmly. The conditions aren't preferential treatment. They're essential risk management for a non-standard situation. Harold nodded slowly, then looked around the table. I believe we have enough information to make a decision. All in favor of conditional approval as outlined by Ms. Winters? One by one, hands raised around the table. Even Jackson, after a moment's hesitation, added his vote to the consensus. Conditional approval granted, Harold announced. Eleanor, please prepare the formal letter outlining the terms. I'll want to review it before it goes out. He stood gathering his papers. And Eleanor? I'd like to see you in my office afterward. As the committee members filed out, Margaret lingered behind. You surprised me, she admitted quietly. I was sure you were going to recommend denial. So was I replied, gathering my materials, until about 4 this morning. What changed your mind? I considered the question carefully. I realized that denying the application because of our history would be just as unprofessional as approving it for the same reason. Either way, I'd be letting personal feelings override financial judgment. And the conditions? Those are entirely financial, necessary protections given the circumstances. Margaret's expression was skeptical but approving. Well done. I'll see you at the staff meeting this afternoon. Harold's office occupied the corner of the top floor, with views of both downtown Oak Ridge and the distant coastline. As I entered, he was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back. The last time you were in this office, he said, without turning, was 3 years ago, right after Richard left. You walked in, asked to be considered for the loan officer position that had just opened, and told me you were done being defined by your marriage. I'd almost forgotten that conversation. Those first weeks after Richard's departure had passed in a blur of grief and rage and determination. I remember, I said, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Harold turned from the window. I took a chance on you then, not because I felt sorry for you, but because I saw something in you that I suspect Richard had overshadowed for years. A sharp mind for finance, a natural caution balanced with genuine empathy for clients. Thank you, sir. Your handling of the Peterson application confirms my judgment was correct. He sat down behind his desk. It would have been easy, even justifiable, to recommend denial based on the legitimate concerns you identified. The fact that you found a path to conditional approval instead demonstrates exactly the kind of balanced thinking we need in this bank. Relief washed over me. I had been half expecting a reprimand, a suggestion that I had allowed personal matters to influence my professional judgment. That said, Harold continued, his tone shifting slightly, I think it might be best if someone else handles the closing process, assuming Mr. Peterson accepts our conditions. Kevin has been showing promise. This would be a good learning opportunity. For him. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in this suggestion. I agree. I've prepared him with all the necessary background. Excellent. Harold leaned back in his chair. Now, off the record, Eleanor. Are you all right? This can't have been easy. The kindness in his voice nearly undid me. For 3 days, I had maintained a facade of professional detachment while my emotional foundation shook beneath me. Now, sitting in Harold's sunlit office with the weight of the decision behind me, I felt the facade beginning to crack. I will be, I said, my voice less steady than I would have liked. It's been complicated. Life usually is. Harold's expression softened. Take the rest of the day off. The staff meeting can proceed without you. I appreciate that, but I'd rather stay busy. Harold studied me for a moment, then nodded. As you wish, but my door is open if you need it. Back in my office, I drafted the conditional approval letter, carefully outlining each requirement and its rationale. No personal comments, no references to our shared history, just clear, professional terms presented with appropriate gravity given the circumstances. I had just finished when my phone rang. The display showed a number I didn't recognize. Eleanor. Winters speaking. Ms. Winters, this is Dr. Sophia Chen from West Shore Medical. The voice was crisp, professional. I understand you're handling Richard Peterson's mortgage application for the Sandpiper property. I frowned, wondering how she had this information. That's correct, though I'm afraid I can't discuss client applications with— I'm not calling about the application details, she interrupted. I'm calling about the clinical trial. Mr. Peterson mentioned that the property purchase is contingent on financing, and that you're the loan officer handling the case. I see. I chose my words carefully. The application is being processed according to our standard procedures. Of course. I just wanted to emphasize the time-sensitive nature of the trial. Participants need to be established in their residences by June 15th to qualify. The treatment protocol begins July 1st. Today was May 12th. Just over a month for Richard to secure financing, complete the property purchase, and finish enough construction to make the house habitable. The committee has made its decision, I said. Mr. Peterson will be notified of the terms today. Beyond that, I can't comment on the specifics. I understand. Thank you for your time. Dr. Chen paused, then added, This trial represents his best hope. I thought you should know that. After she hung up, I sat motionless, the weight of that statement settling over me. His best hope. 3 simple words that carried the burden of life and death, of futures preserved or lost. I finished the approval letter and sent it to Harold for review, then tried to focus on other applications, a construction loan for the new shopping center, a home equity line for the Jacobsons, a refinance for Dr. Mitchell's office building. But my mind kept returning to the image of Richard standing in the rain at Lot 42, facing the ocean with the knowledge of what was coming for him. By late afternoon, Harold had approved the letter, and Kevin had been briefed on handling the next steps. All that remained was delivering the news to Richard. Protocol dictated a simple email notification that documents were ready for review, but something about that felt wrong given the circumstances. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard's number. He answered on the 3rd ring. Eleanor, is it about the application? Yes, the committee has reached a decision. I kept my voice neutral, professional. We're prepared to offer conditional approval. His sudden intake of breath was audible. Conditional? What conditions? 3. Major ones. I outlined them briefly. The primary residence designation, the medical lien provision, the increased down payment. If these terms are acceptable, Kevin Matthews will handle the closing process from here. Kevin, not you? It's more appropriate given our history. A long pause. I understand. And thank you, Eleanor, for being fair. I wasn't sure you would be after everything. I'm a professional, Richard. That hasn't changed. No, it hasn't. His voice softened. It's one of the many things I always admired about you. The unexpected compliment caught me off guard. The formal letter will be emailed shortly. You'll need to sign and return it within 3 business days to proceed. I will. Another pause. Eleanor, about the house. About what Amber told you. We don't need to discuss that, I cut in. The application has been evaluated on its financial merits. Any other arrangements you've made are your personal business. But I want you to understand. I understand. Enough, Richard. I kept my voice even. You're facing a difficult diagnosis and making preparations accordingly. That's between you, your wife, and your estate attorney. And if I want it to include you? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 40 years of shared history and 3 years of painful separation. That's something we can discuss another time, I finally replied. For now, focus on getting the financing secured and the construction completed. Dr. Chen called me. You need to be moved in by June 15th to qualify for the trial. She called you directly? Richard sounded surprised. That's unusual. Apparently your case is important to them. Not my case, he corrected gently. My potential contribution to the research. Patient 37 in a double-blind study. It's not a cure, Eleanor. Just a chance to add a few more coherent months to whatever time I have left. The matter-of-fact way he discussed his prognosis made my throat tighten. Well, the conditional approval should help make that possible, assuming you accept the terms. I will. They're fair, given the circumstances. We lapsed into silence, not the comfortable silence of our marriage, but not the strained silence of recent encounters either. Something in between, tinged with a shared awareness of mortality and missed opportunities. I should go, I said finally. I have other applications to process. Of course. And Eleanor? Yes? Thank you. Not just for the approval, but for seeing me. The real me, not just the man who hurt you. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, watching the late afternoon light shift across the walls of my office. For 3 years, I had defined myself in opposition to Richard's abandonment. The wronged wife who had rebuilt her life from scratch, who had proven she didn't need the husband who had discarded her. My independence had been both shield and sword, protecting me from further hurt while cutting away any lingering vulnerability. Now, faced with Richard's illness and his imperfect attempts at amends, I found myself in unfamiliar emotional territory. Neither forgiveness nor anger seemed adequate responses to the complex reality we found ourselves in. A soft knock at my door roused me from my thoughts. "Margaret! Kevin said you called Richard with the decision," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "How did he take it?" "Gratefully. He'll accept the conditions." Margaret studied me. "And how are you taking it?" I considered the question. "I'm processing." "That's fair." She crossed to the visitor's chair and sat down. "You know, when my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's, my mother was still so angry about his affair 10 years earlier that she almost refused to help with his care. It took her months to separate her feelings about their marriage from her. Response to his illness, I raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting I should help care for Richard?" "God, no." Margaret laughed. "That's Amber's job now. I'm just saying it's possible to acknowledge the reality of someone's illness without erasing the hurt they've caused you. Both things can be true at once. Both things can be true at once." The complexity of that idea resonated with something shifting inside me. Richard could be both the husband who had abandoned me and a man facing a devastating diagnosis. I could be both deeply hurt by his betrayal and professionally fair in evaluating his application. The beach house could be both the dream we had, shared, and something entirely new in its ultimate manifestation. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, meaning it. "For everything these past few days." "That's what bosses are for," she replied with a wink. "To dispense unwanted wisdom and force you to take days off." After she left, I closed up my files and prepared to head home. The emotional exhaustion of the past few days was catching up to me, and I longed for the sanctuary of my garden, the comforting weight of Fitzgerald on my lap, perhaps a glass of wine as the sun set. As I was gathering my things, Kevin appeared in my doorway, looking flustered. "Eleanor, I just got a call from Richard Peterson. He wants to meet tomorrow to go over the conditional approval details. I've got that closing in Portland tomorrow. Is there any way you could—" "No," I interrupted gently. "This needs to be your case from now on, Kevin. Reschedule for Friday." He nodded, looking relieved. "I'll do that, and thank you for trusting me with this. I know it's a complicated one." "You're ready for it," I assured him. "Just remember that behind every application is a person with a story. Our job is to evaluate the finances, but we shouldn't forget the humanity in the process." Kevin looked surprised at this philosophical turn. "I'll remember that." 3 weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail. Thick cream cardstock embossed with the West Shore Medical logo, inviting me to their annual fundraising gala as a guest of Dr. Sophia Chen. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the invitation. "Richard mentioned you served on our advisory board previously. We'd love to have you back. The new Alzheimer's wing needs voices like yours. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter, unsure how to respond. Richard's application had proceeded smoothly under Kevin's handling. The sale of the San Diego property had closed, providing the enhanced down payment our conditions required. Construction at Lot 42 had accelerated, with crews working extended hours to ensure the June 15th move-in deadline would be met. I had driven by the property occasionally, watching from a distance as the modern structure took shape against the sky. Once, I thought I glimpsed Amber supervising a delivery of furniture, but I hadn't stopped to confirm. Richard and I had not spoken since the conditional approval phone call. I had seen him around town, at Morgan's grocery, at the pharmacy picking up prescriptions, but we had maintained a careful distance, acknowledging each other with nods but not conversation. The invitation represented a potential point of intersection in our carefully separated lives. Returning to the West Shore Advisory Board would mean periodic encounters with Richard as he participated in the clinical trial. The professional and personal boundaries I had worked so hard to establish might blur. Fitzgerald jumped onto the counter, a behavior I normally discouraged, and batted at the invitation with his paw. "What do you think, Fitz?" I asked him. "Ready? To share me with a hospital committee again?" The doorbell rang before he could offer his feline wisdom. Through the front window, I saw Susan on my porch, holding a bottle of wine and what appeared to be takeout bags from Giordano's, our favorite Italian restaurant. "Emergency dinner intervention," she announced when I opened the door. "I saw you drive by Lot 42 again today, third time this week." "I was just passing by," I defended weakly, taking the wine from her. "And I just happened to order enough pasta for two and drive all the way across town with it while it's still hot." Susan followed me to the kitchen, setting down the bags and immediately noticing the invitation. "What's this? West Shore." "Gala? Are you going back on the board?" "I haven't decided," I admitted, retrieving wine glasses from the cabinet. "Dr. Chen invited me." "Richard's doctor?" Susan raised an eyebrow. "Interesting." "It's not about Richard," I insisted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "The new Alzheimer's wing is doing important work. My mother would have benefited from something like that." Susan uncorked the wine and poured 2 generous glasses. "So go. Use your financial expertise to help them raise money. Just be clear with yourself about why you're doing it." I took a sip of wine, letting its warmth spread through me. "That's the problem. I'm not sure I know anymore." "Yes, you do." Susan began unpacking the food containers. "You're doing it because you're Eleanor Winters, a woman who has always cared deeply about her community. A woman who spent 40 years sublimating her own identity into being Mrs. Richard Peterson, then spent 3 years defining herself in opposition to that role. And now maybe you're ready to just be yourself, neither attached to Richard nor defined by his absence." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "When did you get so insightful?" "Around the 3rd glass of whiskey the night he left," Susan replied with a grin. "Profound wisdom emerges from profound outrage on a friend's behalf." We settled at my kitchen table with our pasta and wine, Fitzgerald weaving hopefully between our chairs. "I recommended approval of his application," I said after a while. "Not because I forgive him, but because it was the right thing to do professionally." "I know," Susan said simply, "and that's why you'll accept that invitation. Not because you forgive him, but because it's the right thing to do for the work you care about." She was right, of course. The decision about the advisory board was really no different from the decision about the mortgage application. Both required separating my personal history from my professional judgment, acknowledging the complexity of the situation without allowing it to paralyze me. "I'll call Dr. Chen tomorrow," I decided, "and I'll need a new dress for the gala." Susan grinned. "Now you're talking. Something in that amazing sapphire blue that brings out your eyes. Richard should see exactly what he's missing." "This isn't about Richard," I protested, though a small smile tugged at my lips. Of course not, Susan agreed, her expression innocent. But if he happens to notice how fabulous you look while you're discussing endowment strategies with potential donors, that's just a happy coincidence. Later, after Susan had gone and I was getting ready for bed, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was lined with 66 years of life, joy and sorrow, love and loss, achievement and setback. But it was also lined with something newer, something I was just beginning to recognize. Wisdom, perhaps. Or grace. The capacity to hold contradictory truths without being destroyed by them. Richard had left me, cruelly and suddenly. That was true. Richard was facing a devastating illness with courage and a desire to make amends. That was also true. I had been deeply hurt by his abandonment. True. I could make professional decisions that affected his future without being governed by that hurt. Equally true, and perhaps most importantly, I was no longer defined by my relationship to Richard, neither by our 40-year marriage nor by its painful end. I was Eleanor Winters, loan officer, friend, garden enthusiast, cat owner, potential hospital board member, a woman who could reject a mortgage application if the numbers didn't work, or approve one conditionally when they did, regardless of who submitted it. As I turned out the light and settled into the middle of my bed, my preferred spot now, with no one to share it with, I realized that the mortgage application that had thrown my carefully reconstructed life into turmoil had actually helped me take the final step in my healing, not by giving me an opportunity for revenge, but by showing me I no longer needed it. The conditional approval I had recommended for Richard's beach house was, in the end, a gift to myself. Proof that I could face the man who had broken my heart and make a fair decision based on merit rather than history. Proof that I was, finally and completely, my own woman. Fitzgerald jumped onto the bed, curling against my side with a contented purr. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, tapping against the windows with a soothing rhythm. "We're going to be okay, Fitz," I whispered into the darkness. "Whatever comes next, we're going to be just fine." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen.